Have you given any thought to contributing to the melt? It's easy to do. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. It helps to keep the magic happening here at the Melt. So I encourage you to karmically entangle yourself with the Melt today by subscribing monthly for less than the price of a container of goatee wax, or a prosthetic pinky, or a half stick of DMT butter, or an inflatable casket, or the shrunken head of an Atlantean supermodel, or a woolly mammoth's merkin, or a crystalline replica of Baba Yaga's hut, or a capsule of Sasquatch dander.
This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Nothing truly is what it seems. In such a media-steeped world, it sometimes seems like there's nothing that media hasn't gotten to first and tried to predefine for you. We tend to think that propaganda is only interested in shaping our political views, but in reality, it pervades almost every aspect of our lives that media is concerned with being the go-between for. Mainstream media is so preoccupied with manufacturing new spectacles to keep you distracted with such a dizzying, ever-quickening news cycle that narratives, like the most fleeting of fads, get buried under the multi-layered landfill so quickly that there's no time to really parse them out or dig deeper into them. We barely have a chance to look back or reflect, and when we do, we get whatever montage of sound bites have been pre-approved and re-edited in order to cast whatever shadows on the cave wall the dream makers wish us to see. But within the last 10 or so years, there has been a tributary of the truth community that has been delving into different ways of interpreting the past. Through gathering old film footage, rummaging through old sepia-toned photographs, collecting long-forgotten maps of the world and the land masses that it consists of, a profoundly stranger and provocative understanding of the past begins to unfold. Today's guest, Olde Worlde, explores these dimly lit avenues of the past on his YouTube channel, where he puts together collages of vintage photographs and maps, together with his narration and accompanied by music that he composes especially for his meditations on a forbidden past that we are only now beginning to grapple with the implications of. I start off the conversation by asking him what the impetus was for starting his YouTube channel.
Yeah, no, I didn't really think too much of it, but I had originally had different intentions for the channel, and with the Tartaria thing and the mudflood thing, it keeps going. So, but eventually it's going to be just about the world in general. So that's why I had that name, Olde Worlde, because I think a lot of people look back at history, look back at the past, and it's kind of scary sometimes.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially with the some of the imagery that accompanies the quote unquote old world, it looks I mean, it's great. I think I like the aesthetic that you use, the music that you put with it, because
Oh,
it's
thanks.
fitting. Yeah, it's fitting for that. It's very dreamlike, almost kind of David Lynch in a sense, but it's almost like visiting another world in a sense, because it seems so otherworldly.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've been doing music for 20 years now, basically, since I was a teenager, and I'm in my, late 30s now. And I've seen things, trends come and go. And I don't know if you're familiar with vaporwave.
I'm not.
Vaporwave is like taking like the 80s aesthetic and, slowing music down. And it's kind of like a vibe, like an 80s vibe. And that started getting really popular like 2010, 2011. So that's what I do sometimes with some of the reels on Instagram and stuff, is I put like a VHS aesthetic to these 1800s photos. And it just kind of creates like a weird kind of vibe of like
Yeah.
1980s and 1890s and like this 100-year difference. And yeah, it's a trip, but people really like that aesthetic. And if it gets people to go down a rabbit hole where they it's all a hook. It's all like
Yeah.
art. And
Sure.
I saw that a lot with the Tartaria guys and the Mudflood guys, is they're doing it in almost like a quasi academic, like a renegade academic kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to put like an artistic kind of like a street kind of spin on it. And I have clothing and stuff like that too, so I incorporate that with the clothing. And
I actually
it's just
did that. I actually did that in the 80s with hallucinogenics.
yeah. What's that specifically?
I mixed those two vibes, the 80s music, slowing down the
Yeah.
80s music with photos from the 1800s. That's, you
Yeah.
basically just described my whole kind of teenage life.
Mm. That's interesting. They had that idea as well.
It's, like minds. It's kind of the collective unconscious working together.
Yeah, it must be. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on in the community, actually. People accusing each other of ripping each other off, but it's just there's only so much to investigate. So, like, for example, like I did a video about asylums, about the history of asylums
I
in the
love that.
1800s.
Love that video.
Thank you. And so coincidentally, a couple other channels did too, in the same week. But I had released that to my members, for the YouTube members to see it first. But coincidentally, a couple other people did a video. So then a couple people started a rumor saying that I was an FBI agent, and the other people were, and that we all collude together, and it's a psyop and all this stuff, and we're all protected by the CIA, and that's why our channels don't get taken down, and that's why we have so many followers, and so on and so forth. But nothing could be further from the truth, actually. I'm completely independent. I don't have any help at all, like with anything except for my wife and stuff, who helps me, because she'll watch our daughter while I'm out making videos or something like that. Or
Mm-hmm.
I love that list. I've posted that list many times back when I was on Facebook, and I love reading that list because it astounds so many people that things like novel reading could get you committed to an asylum. That's insane.
Yeah, read too many books and you lose your mind.
Or maybe become a threat.
Well, it's like nowadays internet addiction is considered a mental illness.
Sure.
So back then books brought, so if somebody was just reading books all the time, they were just obsessed with them. They weren't eating and they weren't sleeping. They were spending all their money on books. They were neglecting their responsibilities to read books. You could kind of see how there's like similarities to today's addiction of smartphones or pornography or video games or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you could be a threat to the narrative if you were actually educating yourself.
Obviously, yeah, that's what we would think about that as well. Like books could be subversive.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and you being suspected of being some fucking FBI agent or something like that is just, that's where watching too many YouTube videos can start to fog the border between reality and fantasy, because everything becomes a psyop at that point.
Oh yeah, no, there's people that fall down that rabbit hole. For sure.
It's a sickness. Like you got to know when to, I don't know. I mean, I think I guess it's not so easy if you had to describe how to navigate stuff like that to somebody else. It's really a more of a gut sense that you have. But there are people that have that knee-jerk reaction to just about anything that they encounter. Mr. Rogers is a psyop. You know, name it. But insert anything from pop culture, anything from the truth community, you name it. It's all up for grabs, you know. And granted, there are a lot of fucking psyops out there. That's why people get paranoid, you know. But you got to know, you know, what.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, I just for the record, I do happen to think that Mr. Rogers was a little bit of a psyop.
Guilty.
Not like super hardcore, but he's what I would put in the classification of false authority. Kind of like
sure.
Bill Nye, the fake science guy.
Oh,
that definitely, yeah.
Like,
yeah.
But I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. I'm just saying, like, a lot of people, he's like a secret cow. You know,
sure.
like I've said, well, you know, it wasn't that. It was just children's TV. And then these people, you know, so-called friends will like freak out and go, oh, you can't say anything. Like he's like their priest, you know, or something, or he's
sure.
like their lost uncle or something, you know.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I get that, you know, a lot is because I challenge, you know, everything. Like I don't really like. I mean, I believe in God. You know, I don't really question that too much. I have faith in God, and that throws people for a loop too, because they're like, well, wait a minute, like you swear and you dress the way you dress and you talk the way, you know, and I'm just like, well, that doesn't change my relationship with God. Like I just happen to believe in a creator. And you know, people are like, but you used to be in a black metal band. And it's like, yeah, that's true. I was in a black metal band and I still listen to black metal, but I'm not out there trying to, you know, destroy the sanctity of family or society. Like it's just music to me. Like I play music, I appreciate music. I see the aesthetics of it. And a lot of the bands that I listened to weren't necessarily politically correct bands. You know, a lot of that kind of, I don't know if you guys are familiar with, you know, black metal and stuff like that, but it has a certain tie-in with the old world in a way, because a lot of those guys were pagans and they were worshiping the old gods and all that kind of stuff. They weren't necessarily just normal Satanists. They were practicing pagan, you know, religions. And that got them into trouble because they were considered terrorists. And a lot of those black metal bands aren't allowed in the United States and so forth. So I've always been like flirting with danger. You know, like when I was a kid, I was really into skateboarding. And that's what actually got me into photography. And then I got into photography, and then these photography skills are paying off now with the YouTube channel. So it all just culminated into this. And I've been big into conspiracy theories since I was a kid too, because my dad was a conspiracy nut. And he told me all this stuff when I was a kid, like the moon landing was fake, you know, JFK stuff, aliens were fake, aliens are just a psyop, you know, all that kind of stuff. So when all this stuff started popping off, I don't know, I guess around 2000, right around when Trump, you know, was running and all that stuff happened, I was already ahead of the curve. So when I went on 4chan and stuff like that, and people were talking about all these conspiracies, I was like, well, I've already kind of been there, done that. So what's the next thing? And then that's when I found out about this Tartaria thing and the old world. And so I started looking into that because I was kind of bored with all the, you know, cliche conspiracy theories, the 9/11 thing. I figured that out. It was just like, what's the next thing? And so it just really piqued my interest, and there was a certain nostalgia about it. And I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, so I can go and look at a lot of these things in person, a lot of these, you know, places that people talk about. And what really gets me about the whole thing, because everybody's kind of scratching their head still, like what's going on, is how did they build this stuff so fast?
Exactly.
And bricks and just the labor. And I just think about it, and it's like people are mystified by pyramids. I think it's just as baffling how some of these skyscrapers got built.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about the logistics of that, like you said, the bricks, like producing that many bricks and that much building material in and of itself, not to mention the labor force that it would take to erect these things in such an insanely short amount of time. Yeah, it doesn't add up.
Yeah, and then just to tear them all down and start over. And then the weird thing is you see these giant brick buildings, these granite buildings, these marble, and you find them in like the middle of the country. You find them in formerly small towns, like in their post offices and their city halls, and they look like giant palaces and all this stuff. And all that stuff aside about it being thousands of years old and all this stuff, I can't prove or disprove that. But all I know for sure is that it's a little strange how every 100 years going back, 1700s, 1600s, there always seems to be some big event that changes things. And now we see now, I don't know what kind of language I can use, if this is going to be on YouTube or Facebook or anything, but can I talk about the pandemic?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So 100 years ago, we had the Spanish flu, thing.
Mm-hmm.
And people were wearing masks and they were trying to get inoculations, and they didn't shut down the world economy. That was just out of the question. But they went to the lengths that they could go to, and I see that as like a reset or a little mini kind of reset. And the World's Fairs changed. Like, we still have World's Fairs. We never stopped having them. It's just that we dropped that old world Greco-Roman kind of aesthetic to them. But we're having a World's Fair right now in Dubai.
Mm-hmm.
And we've always had them, and it is a way to show off, technology and all this stuff. But the World's Fairs from the 1800s to like about the 1920s,
Mm-hmm.
those are the ones that people really focus on. Chicago, San Francisco, Buffalo, New York, St. Louis, Missouri. I think some people talk about the Los Angeles and the San Diego ones, those aren't mentioned as much, but mostly San Francisco.
Yeah.
Well, the Chicago one seems to be the one that people are interested in the most, and they're actually making a TV show about it. It's called The Devil in the White City.
Yeah, from the book.
Is it Keanu Reeves in that?
Yeah, that's what I heard. But that kind of stuff, it sends off alarms in my head. Like, okay, well, that means that they're trying to disprove it, they're trying to debunk it preemptively, so that when people find out about it, they go, oh, it's like that show. You
Right.
watch that show too much. Like when people talk about
or rewrite it.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's going to necessarily be about the Tartaria conspiracy.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be more just about how they did it and the whole thing. And there's some controversies about it, or something about slavery, probably, or something like that. But the point is that it's like when you watched, if you watched the X-Files or something like that in the 1990s, and you start talking about, or you saw the Men in Black movies or something like that. Mm-hmm. The Men in Black are real. They don't have necessarily like mind erasing, toothbrushes or whatever they use, but they have like an organization of agents who go out and try to silence people if they saw something they weren't supposed to see. They're like, like enforcers. I mean, that's just a fact. People have been visited by them.
Yeah.
They're just like hush hush kind of thing. So I think that media does that too. And that you saw that with like Ancient Aliens. They supposedly were pitched a show by some guys from YouTube. They went to History Channel. They got a meeting and everything. They showed them the mudfloods and the Tartaria. And basically the History Channel people were just like, get the fuck out of here. Like, this is crazy. We're not talking about this. But then at the same time, they'll do Ancient Aliens and they'll say basically the same thing. And then they'll just put it on aliens and say, oh, well, it's aliens. I don't know. We that's all we can do. Like, see you on the next episode, where they like set you up with a bunch of and then well, how did this happen? Well, researchers say it was aliens, but they don't even like say that's it. It's just in every episode's a cliffhanger.
And that completely takes it out of the human realm too. Like, of course, we're not supposed to have had any sort of technology that could develop Göbekli Tepe or anything like that. Mm-hmm. So it must have been aliens. When that completely doesn't even go into the fact that there maybe was a civilization that we don't know about that could have, had all traces wiped out except for things that we're just now unearthing, that could have easily had the technology to develop this. We think that the technology that we have now is the apex of what it's ever been. And more and more, it seems like that's not the case. It seems like there's a lot of crazy stuff going on. And, you see it in, you mentioned what was that?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, you mentioned watching John Levi's videos, and he has a lot of, who's great. I didn't know, I hadn't heard about him until I heard you mention it on a couple of your interviews. And he has a lot of videos where he zooms into photographs and you see people like looking like they're Skyping and all this, what is called antiquitech, which I would love to know more about, antiquitech. Like I said, when we were corresponding earlier. I'm just sort of now getting into dipping my toe into this stuff. So what, maybe describe what antiquitech is and maybe some examples of it.
Okay, yeah, I'll give you a really good example. This, you can look this up. This is like all documented and the official story kind of stuff. You've heard of Baghdad battery?
I've heard of it, but I don't know what it is.
So it's like an earthen jar, you know, like terracotta or whatever, like a canopic jar, like the Egyptians used to put the organs, like, you know, just like that kind of shape.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got copper, and then you got vinegar. So you mix the copper and the vinegar, creates an electrical charge. Now they found those in ancient Babylonia, which is now Iraq, and that's why it's called the Baghdad battery.
Right.
So that's one example. So they were obviously, they had some type of power source. Now, what was that being used to power? That's also up for debate. It could have been a clock, it could have been a mill, it could have been a security device, like you put it on something and then it would shock you. And some people say that's what they did with the Ark of the Covenant.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard the stories where people touch it and they would okay, so they think maybe they hooked a Baghdad battery up to the Ark of the Covenant to keep people from stealing it or whatever, disturbing it. On the shores of Greece, they found an adding machine. Basically looked like a giant cash register. It had a bunch of gears and stuff in it, and it had numbers and buttons. Basically, it was like an adding machine, but they dated it at like 2,000 years old. That's antiquitech. Okay, the pyramid had the gold cap on the Great Pyramids in Giza. And some people theorize that in its heyday, it was, conducting energy. It was taking energy from lightning, energy from the aether, and then it was powering the pyramid. They were basically like a power station.
Right.
And so we see that in the study of Tartaria, the old world, whatever you want to call it, examples of the skyscrapers and the buildings. They all have these big, like they call them lightning rods, but people theorize that, yeah, they're lightning rods, but they were taking energy and they were harnessing it somehow. Whether it was to heat the homes, these places, they have these fireplaces, but they're not fireplaces. They're heating stations, and they use radium. And that's a fact too, because if you go back in the 1800s, you look at magazines and publications, you can find advertisements for these things. You can buy radium, and they were advertising it as something you could heat your home with. So they had these decorative hearths, they look like fireplaces, but you're not supposed to burn wood in them. Then when the inheritors came, which was the people after the reset, people that found these buildings, they started putting wood in them because they were burning wood in the old world, and they ruined them because these things had really ornate backgrounds made out of like gold and steel, or sometimes steel, but gold, copper, silver, and they put wood in there, and they built the chimneys. The chimneys were added afterwards because with the radium heating, you didn't need a chimney. You just put the radium in there, and there was these decorative rods and things you put the radium in. And there's people who say that radium doesn't cause radiation, it doesn't kill you. And there's guys who would like eat it and stuff like that, and they wouldn't get sick. And it's this big cover up because it was not free, but it was a cheap source of energy and for heating. And it was like the gas companies wanted to hook up all the houses up with gas and make it more dangerous and expensive and all that kind of stuff. So those are some examples of antiquitech. Another example would be like the Zeppelins. We call them the dirigibles. Like airships.
Yeah.
People say we had those a long time ago too. They were building ships on the tops of cliffs with sails, but there was a way to create, and then they would float, and they had propellers and all that kind of stuff. And the aviation is a lot older. Another example I could think of is there's a Tibetan temple. There's video of this. There's a Tibetan temple in Nepal, and it was during a lightning storm. There was these chains on the roof of the building on these kind of lightning rods. And once the energy storm started to really get going, these chains started to spin around, and people took videos of it and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, well, maybe at some point all these buildings had chains, and chains created some type of centrifugal force. And it's all just really fascinating stuff. I know it sounds like really off the wall, but that's how these things start. I mean, we could extrapolate anything and say, oh, that's crazy, because if there's enough people that are going against it. But we've been proven time after time that things that start out as kind of nuts, and then they get proven to be true. And so I just think like there's so many people with their eyes on it right now. It's not going away.
Yeah, for sure. And those are just the civilizations that we have documentation of. That doesn't include like Atlantis. Atlantis was supposed to have advanced technology too.
Mm-hmm.
And that obviously was on a lot of old maps, which you have a video out of that too that I was watching earlier today. So yeah, I mean, there's who knows what came before we started taking pictures and we have film of, the possibilities are endless. I don't think it sounds outlandish at all. It makes total sense to me.
The other thing that gets me is the caloric intake and energy output ratio to build these things, like these ancient cities. Not even what's here in North America, but we can go back to the old world. We can go back to ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient Babylonia, Sumeria. We don't talk about the Sumerians too much. It's like when we're in high school, we get taught about the ancient Egyptians, and people think that that's the oldest civilization. That's not even close. When we talk about, the ancient Sumerians had cuneiform text, they had a written language, they were building those like Stargate looking things. I don't know if you've ever seen those, but they're in Iraq now. And nobody really knows what's going on with that. And then in their depictions, they always have like a bag in their hand.
Yeah.
It's like a purse.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody's like, what's in the bag? What's in the bag? And you see that in South American ruins too. They have a bag. And I don't think they're aliens or anything. I just think that, they have a different culture, different, type of civilization. But kind of a way of looking at things, like how did they build all this stuff with, simple foods? We're told that they're eating mostly like hummus and goats and things like that. And that's fine. But we know that and this isn't like a climate change, like that kind of climate change, but we know that the climate has changed in geographical areas, and that, for example, like Egypt used to be a forest and they had a bunch of trees, and that's how they were able to build things. And so now it's this arid desert, but it doesn't make sense. And then in North America, we have like UNESCO World Heritage sites where there's like basically cities that were told that it was, Native Americans could have easily housed like tens of thousands of people, but then it's just all desert. It's like, well, there's no way that they were able to build all that without arid, without fertile land, and it just being desert and fresh water, and they just look like wastelands now. But you have to think, what did it look like when it was at its pinnacle, at its peak? And the same thing with like Machu Picchu. The altitude, it's mysterious. They didn't disappear because they wore out they over farmed the land. And in Egypt, they over harvested the forests, and they just kind of had this, the landscape change is what I'm trying to say. So when we look at all that and we say like, well, how did these people work so hard with such meager rations? Well, they didn't. They had more food. They had more. It's like they try to make it like we're off so much better.
Right. More civilized.
We're so much better off now because we have what we have. But I think that they have was right, and they lived shorter. No, I don't buy that. I think people live just as long, and I know life expectancy was a lot lower because of this, because of that. And didn't Plato live to be like 70 something? All these like ancient Greek, their life expectancy was like in the 70s. And they were in the Mediterranean, which was obviously a more temperate climate, and their diet was really good. The Mediterranean diet's really good for the human body, all that kind of stuff. And it's like a class thing. And people say, well, no, because if you got like a wisdom tooth got infected, you die. And all it's like, no, they knew how to pull teeth.
Yeah.
They find skulls with missing teeth. I mean, it's not that hard. It's like, ow, right here, ow. Now, they might not have had the same kind of aesthetic, and what's it called? Aesthetics, but people figured it out. I mean, they were doing phrenology. They were drilling holes in people's heads to alleviate, swollen brains. Like they knew how to do stuff.
Right.
Medicine,
of course.
Yeah.
I think
So I think what I was taught. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think in many ways, medicine has gone backwards. Like we've gone to the point of, like you take traditional Chinese medicine. They had a great handle on the human body. They had a great way of looking at how to cure people because they went to the root cause. Whereas today's medical system is just about putting a Band-Aid on symptoms and, of course, making shitloads of money, making you a lifelong customer by giving you pharmaceuticals that really don't heal anything. So yeah, I think they totally were able to. I mean, their medicine compared to what we have, to me, I mean, they had it down. We fucked it up. You know, as soon as the Rockefeller came in, the Institute came in and kind of took over the whole system and started calling anybody who used natural remedies as quacks and stuff like that. I think that's what messed everything up. I think we had it figured out a long time ago, as far as medicine is concerned.
Oh yeah. So it sounds like you're hip to that. You know about the what's it called? Where the guy went around, took him like 3 or 4 years, but he went around the whole country and he documented every single physician.
Yeah.
And then he brought his report back to the Rockefellers.
Flexner report.
Flexner report, yeah. And then that's when they started. That's when they started the white coats. They're like, oh, we all got to start wearing white coats, like we're authority figures, like we're, you know, people will respect us, like we look like the clergy.
Yes.
Stuff like that. Yeah. No, totally. I mean, I'm obviously not against natural medicine or anything like that. What I don't like is that they synthesize things. Like they look at nature and they find something that's beneficial and then they figure out a way to synthesize it. Like they did that with aspirin. They've done that with, it's a recreational drug now, but it's like MDMA. You know, that's sassafras from Southeast Asia. And that was in sarsaparilla. So when you go back to the Wild West days and guy come in, give me one of them good sarsaparilla. And they were getting like a little high. You know, it's not the same as like taking like an MDMA pill, but they were getting a little juiced off the sassafras that was in the sarsaparilla. Now, when you go and get a root beer or sarsaparilla nowadays, it doesn't have sassafras, obviously, but they still import it from there. They're still harvesting it from those trees. But ecstasy, MDMA, that stuff was legal until 1985. It was actually a marriage counseling drug. They gave yeah, you know about that? Okay.
Yeah. And then I've done a lot of research in that area.
Yeah, me too. Like I'm not a drug user, but I find it fascinating. Like I've never really used any of those kinds of drugs, but it's a fascinating kind of thing. But I'm starting to think it's all just a big psyop, and a lot of those people, you know, it's like an easy way out to say, oh, I just take a bunch of acid and my life's so much better. You know, it's like I can't really, like, I think that a little bit of abstinence is good too.
Sure.
For insight, fasting.
You have the sober state of mind that'll always be there. So I think one thing that psychedelics can do, if used constructively and with respect, is to show you what is possible. Maybe give you a glimpse at something that you can easily access on the natch, as Terence McKenna would say. But yeah, I think that can become a crutch too. You know, you have this great acid experience and it showed you things that you'd never seen before, made you see the world in a different way. And all of a sudden you want to do it again. Then you want to do it. And then your brain is fucking oatmeal after 5 years of doing that. Yeah.
I know people that microdose every single day. Like they bought I knew a guy, he bought thousands of hits off the dark web and he put it in his freezer and he would just take like a little bit every single day. And I said, man, you know, like you got to chill out a little bit. And then he did, and he got a little bit better, but he was having some really gnarly trips and he saw those Nephilim clowns and all that kind of stuff.
Nephilim clowns?
Yeah. You know, the Nephilim, the jesters. Yeah. Well, some people say some people think that they're the Nephilim. So I kind of said that without what's it called? They should have prefaced that. But
yeah, sure.
Yeah, some people think that those guys are actually the Nephilim spirits left over, the ones that, because like biblical kind of stuff. It's like the angels came down and bred with humans, created giants, and God created the flood, and then their souls were still stuck on here. And their souls couldn't go to hell and they couldn't go to heaven, and that's like demonic possession and stuff like that. So they went into this realm that you can access when you smoke DMT. because that's the same chemical that's released in your brain when you fall asleep.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like you're going into the dream world while you're awake.
Mm-hmm.
And these things will like tell you not to believe in God and all this stuff. And it's really spooky stuff. I've never done DMT, so I wouldn't know. But it's this thing, and why I believe in it is because people didn't know about it, and they saw it. Now I think if you know about harlequins, whatever it's called, it kind of ruins it. It's like I'm not going to believe anybody who's like watched a bunch of videos about it and then did DMT for the first time.
Sure.
But I'll believe people that were like, hey, yeah, I did some DMT and I saw some clowns, or I went to a carnival that was checkered floor. And I'm like, whoa, hey, did you know? And that happened to my friend. He didn't know about it. It happened to him. And then I happened to ask him, like, hey, man, have you ever seen like clowns? And he got like scared because he told me what happened was he had a trip where he was being pushed down a hallway. And it was like hospital green walls, hospital green with the scrubs.
Mm-hmm.
And then he looked, and the guy that was pushing him was a clown. It was like a doctor, and he had the jester hat and all that stuff. And then they went into a room. And then he came out of the trip, but and the dude was sitting in his room staring. The thing was just staring at him for like 15 minutes. And then the time that he did DMT after that, he was like, I'm not going to do it. But he didn't know that a bunch of other people had similar experiences with these clowns. So, and I've never heard of any drug, well, except for crystal meth, because when people do crystal meth, they see the shadow people. So we got the shadow people on meth, and then we got the clowns on DMT. And that's the only two entities that I've known that are exclusive to a certain drug that I can think of. Although I guess sometimes alcoholics see pink elephants, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the pink elephant. That's kind of a joke. Never mind.
I think part of the drug culture was introduced to disable people that were questioning the government. So I think there's an element of a psyop in the drug culture. Anytime you get people that are CIA agents that are promoting LSD, for example, like Timothy Leary, you have to kind of question, well, what was what was the intention behind this? Was this really to turn on and shut off, or however the fuck he put it, or was it to take people who were questioning,
turn on and drop out?
Yeah. Were you taking this generation of people who was questioning the Vietnam War and completely debilitating them so they couldn't question the Vietnam War? And it also talk about filling insane asylums. There's plenty of people who did LSD and never came back from those trips because they got too fucked up. So I think that there's that line where you can do something that is, considered a synthesized pharmaceutical, and you can get benefits from it, but you can do that same thing and it can fuck you up for the rest of your life. So I always say, how I dial into it is like, what's the intention here? What's the bigger picture intention? Why are they trying to get people on crystal meth? Why are they trying to get people on crack? Why are they trying to get people on Adderall? And I think a lot of that is to do these experiments on the culture. Like, okay, let's legalize weed and see how people react. Well, what does weed make you? It makes you docile. It makes you hungry, fat, and sleepy.
Yeah, I don't mess around with that stuff anymore. Like I used to a little bit, for creative purposes. My buddies and I would, get loaded on weed and make music and stuff like that. The only time I started to feel paranoid or self-conscious on that stuff was when I wasn't doing anything. And then I would take a break or something, and then I'd say, okay, next time I gotta, when I get high, I gotta go, and I would go for like really long walks, and I would, have talks like this, something productive. But when I was sitting there like this, that's when I was like, whoa, and I started getting really down on myself. And I don't know how people do it, but to each their own. But and as far as like the old world goes, like they had drugs. They had absinthe was really popular in the 1800s, opium, the Coca-Colas and the other tonic, drugs,
Sure.
like Dr. Peppers, and the Sprites, all that stuff was like it was like a shot. It was like a syrup, and they'd mix it with carbonated water and call it a tonic. It was like 10 cents or, a nickel or something, which wasn't really that cheap back then. I mean, relative to what people made, salaries and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But, it's funny because, Elon Musk bought Twitter. I don't know if you guys heard about that. It's a big deal or something, And he's like joking around about what else he's going to buy. And he said, "Oh, I'm going to buy Coca-Cola."
I saw that. Yeah. And put Coke back into it.
And I tweeted, I know he's not going to see it or anything, but I tweeted at him. I said, based in Old World killed, just make sure you keep the fentanyl out of it. Because to me, if they had the tonic the way that they had it back then, with the little bit of coca leaves and stuff, I don't think that that's that big of a deal. People down in South America, they chew those things all day because it's not refined.
Yeah.
And it's still in Coke. Coca-Cola still has, they extract the dopamine out of it, and it's this whole big thing. And they're gonna have 3 different companies do it to make sure that nobody steals it. And then they take the dopamine, and then they send it to medical. They sell it back to the medical industry to make codeine and hydrocodone.
Yeah.
And so the recipe for Coca-Cola, I don't know if you've ever seen where they keep it, but they keep it behind this like big vault.
Yeah.
And they don't let anybody look at it. And you can look at the vault on because you can't copyright a recipe. So if somebody got their hands on that, they could make it, and you can't do anything. But they had a fish in ancient Greece that they would eat. It was like a hallucinogenic fish. Do you know about that?
No.
Yeah, I don't know the name of the fish, but I just know that in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, they would catch this fish, and they knew that it had like psychotropic, properties to it. So they eat the fish and trip out. It's kind of like the toad, toads in Asia that they lick and trip out on that. But yeah, I had a buddy, and he was really into hallucinogenics. And he would try anything. When he found out about belladonna or angel's trumpet, and how it just grows like on suburban lawns, so he went around with a picture that he printed out. This was back in the old days, but he printed out a picture, and he found it, and he goes, "Oh, there it is," and he grabs it and just starts eating it. And then he had a horrible time, and then he ended up getting sick and throwing up. But he did technically hallucinate a little bit. But those are the kinds of things that people did. But you have to look at the context of today. It's like people are a lot more in danger when they're high now, because you have all these external things going on. Now, in 100, 200, 500 years ago, if somebody wanted to like go into the woods and trip out on some mushrooms or something, it wasn't that big of a deal. And people were doing that back then. The Vikings used to take those Amanita muscaria, the red and white ones. Those were the original magic mushrooms, and those were the berserkers. The berserkers.
Yeah.
But they were called the berserkers because they wore bear skinners.
Yeah.
And they were like the toughest, biggest, gnarly. They were like the frontline assembly. And they would go out and they would be on shrooms, and they'd be wielding their axes and fighting with whoever they were raiding. But yeah, so I'm saying people were getting, it's like PCP. People take PCP and they feel like they have like all the strength in the world.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff. And then, people theorize, like, well, what was Samson on to be able to push the temple over with his, it's his hair, his magic hair. But I think that people are taking stimulants for a long time. Drinking coffee, all kinds of pep, things like that. Ginseng, Siberian ginseng. All right. Well, it all ties back to the things that people were a little bit more responsible. Like we had these compounds, we had these drugs, in the old world, and people were definitely doing them, and people were, creating art and all this kind of stuff. And we didn't have the social ills.
Right.
It wasn't a whole industry. We didn't have the Mexican cartel. We didn't have the Chinese mafia. We didn't have all this. Like they're sending all the fentanyl over here to Quebec.
It's also a difference in population too, because you're talking about a lot fewer people on the planet at the same time. What's your theory about witches? I've seen this like a photo from about the turn of the century, maybe a little bit before, of a woman, this like hideously ugly woman that was a witch that was living out like in the woods, like something you would hear in folklore. Do you think that there were people who maybe didn't necessarily look human, but had human characteristics, but also had kind of monstrosities and just in terms of their faces that were maybe conjuring or just living in communities that were separated from cities and metropolitan areas?
Absolutely. I think that there's an old saying, I think it goes something like the devil always leaves his mark. And, when somebody gets into that stuff, there's consequences for it. Like you might be able to live a little bit longer, but you'll be like hideous, like you say. Or you might have some magical powers, but everybody hates you because you're like scary or something like that. My understanding with like the whole thing with witches is that they were probably the people that were like drawn to that kind of stuff in the stereotypical way were maybe people that were already outcasts of society, and that kind of thing drew them in because it was a dark, hand path. Just like we see a lot of people that are dejected from society, that are disillusioned, they kind of start to go towards those types of politics of progressivism, or just kind of being like ultra liberal or whatever you want to call it, and like go into like being Wiccans, witches. Like there's a modern day revival of that kind of like casting spells and stuff like that. But then you look at them and they have like what I call danger hair. They have like all kinds of different colored hair. And they have like asymmetric haircuts, and all that kind of stuff.
And, yeah, we know some people like that.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
I mean, not intimately, but yes.
Are you? Well, hold on. Before, I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. Are you guys a married couple, or are you guys just buddies?
We're a couple for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And do you have children or no children?
I have children from a previous marriage. So yeah, we have kids that live with us every other week.
Awesome.
But we're life partners. Yeah.
Well, that's great. That helps, because what I was going to say is a lot of the witches were spinstress. They were single, no marriage, no children, no boyfriends, no anything. And then we see that now with this society is this rejection of traditional marriage, rejection of any kind of domestic partnership, even like they want to be polyamorous, all this stuff. And then they see people going on traditional path, and they're like the ones who are trying to shun them. But as far as them being like a different race or like creature, where are you guys? Are you guys in the East Coast?
We're in the Midwest.
West, in California, and there's an area where there's albinos, and they're like, it's kind of a local legend that they're cannibals and they're incestual and all that kind of stuff. And it's just something that's been going around for a long time. And even kids from the 60s, talk about, oh, you gotta get home before dark, otherwise the albinos will get you. And they happen to be by an old sulfur spring that was used as one. I did a video about. I actually went out there and filmed the old sulfur springs. They had like baths that you could sit in, and they're still there.
Wow.
And that kind of ties in with the old world and all that stuff.
Wow.
So yeah, the albinos, they were like the witches of the time. And so there was these two sisters, they were twins, and they supposedly got a grimoire and learned how to cast spells and all that stuff. So then they were seen as witches. So I think I think people that have a certain draw to that kind of stuff, they may be like, and so obviously sometimes we say, well, that's just a stereotype and they're this and they're that. But no, I think that there was people who were in the dark ages and the Middle Ages and all that kind of stuff. I think there was people into that kind of stuff, and there was people trying to stop it because they didn't want the idea to spread. And we see that now. We're trying to get rid of things that we see as detrimental to Western society. And that's kind of where I lose people sometimes, or people are a little shocked or whatever, is that I'm not completely open-minded to the possibility of some spiritual connection to this. Like, to me, it's like all the open-mindedness and all the stuff from the hippies, it's kind of actually what started to set us on this path of totalitarianism. Because
Exactly.
and I'm glad you understand, because some people don't understand. They see like the hippie movement was the beginning of the subversive movement.
Exactly.
And they're like, oh, you want to go back to Leave It to Beaver. And it's like, I'm not saying we go back to Leave It to Beaver, and Father Knows Best and all that kind of stuff. I'm just saying that, look where, like you mentioned, Timothy Leary. My dad met that guy. My dad met Timothy Leary, and he went out to that Ken Kesey guy's place out in, because that's where I'm from. Like that's like a stone's throw from where I'm sitting.
Wow.
And the Merry Pranksters and the Hells Angels and all those guys, and they were trading. The Angels were selling speed, and the hippies were selling all that stuff. My dad got busted for selling mescaline. He went to county jail for it. And then when he was sitting in county jail, the FBI came and said, "You didn't sign up for the draft." And he said, "Well, I couldn't. I was in jail." And they're like, "Well, when you get out, you got to go report to the Selective Service." And so he did, and he got there late, and the guy got all pissed off, and my dad was just like, "Hey man, look, if this is the way it's going to be, like, fuck this shit. I ain't taking." The guy that my dad told off was like 5'2".
Right.
So he got all pissed off and shit, went over to what's it called, superior officer, and the superior officer happened to be on the phone, and he said, like, "I'm on the phone, I'm gonna set up a date with this whore. Like, you can't just like whore out." So that's how my dad got out of it. But he didn't like dodge it. He went down there. He just didn't like the guy's attitude. He told him off, and then that thing led to that. And he said, "Okay, fine, fuck it, whatever. You're gonna fucking do it." So then he started running around with the Hells Angels and selling dope and stuff a little bit, and got caught for it and all that kind of stuff. But the point is that he met those guys and he thought they were fucking creeps.
You've got to read, if you haven't read Tom O'Neill's book, Chaos.
I know about, yeah.
Incredible book. And also Annie Jacobson has written a couple of really great books about kind of this whole world that we're talking about. And I think it's so interesting because it's what you're saying, like people who go into, this kind of what I always call the free love hippie bullshit movement. They don't really understand what that was really about, like what that was actually leading us to, which is totalitarianism and government control and spying on people.
Yeah.
And infiltrators.
They had to create they had to create the hippies to create the yuppies. But then they had this like missing link, which was the yippies. Like, what was his name? Don't Steal This Book guy.
Abbie Hoffman.
Abbie Hoffman. He created the yippies.
Mm-hmm.
And then the yippies turned into yuppies. Yeah. I actually happen to have a pretty direct connection. Kind of, I wouldn't say intimate, but a very. I have a connection with Uncle Charlie. With
really?
the guy they call Manson. Yeah. So here's what happened. So my dad was in Vacaville in the 80s, and Vacaville is a state hospital in California. Yeah. It's like a prison. Yeah. But they don't have guns. They have guns on the outside of the walls, but they don't have guns on the inside. These guys, like, they're all sedated on Halidol and Percocets and everything. Anyways, so my dad was in there right after Charlie left. You didn't get to meet Charlie, but the guy who gave him the tattoo was still there. He gave him the swastika tattoo.
Yeah.
His name was Smiley. So I go visit my dad, and Smiley's in the visiting room too with his family. And I'm sitting on Smiley's lap. I'm like 4 or 5 years old, and he liked me a lot and stuff. He was a pretty good dude. And he told my dad the story. So what happened was Charlie was like rubbing his hands together and pacing around. Swastika. I want a swastika. God damn it. Everybody's got a swastika tattoo. I want a swastika. And so Smiley got sick of hearing about it. So he went and he grabbed him and he said, I'll give you a fucking swastika tattoo, you fucking punk. And he held him down and he turned that X into a swastika. So he goes, zip, 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 zip. And he goes, there's your fucking swastika. So I met the guy, I sat on the lap of the guy who gave Charlie the tattoo on his forehead.
Crazy.
That's my connection. You know, so maybe that explains a few things. I don't know.
It's really interesting if you drill into the Manson story and his connections with the CIA and the FBI and how he kept getting let out of jail, and they were trying to get him to go to Mexico to do some soil work, like to do some investigations about soil in Mexico. Like, what the fuck did he know about soil? It's so it's so shady. And again, it's like one of these things. If you start to talk to people about this, we're so inundated and overwhelmed with information that they're like, well, why are you talking about something that happened 50 years ago? Like, who gives a fuck? You know, but it is all related. There is this infrastructure that connects all of these things together.
I'm glad you brought up Charlie, because you kind of opened up like a Pandora's box. And I'll give you guys another story. And I've told this a few times. And okay, so here's the way that I understand what happened. And this was from Smiley, from Charlie, because they were buddies. And he told him, he said, look, here's what happened. Roman Polanski was making dirty movies.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people know that. It's not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
He was making dirty movies with, you know, he had Mama Cass with Frank Sinatra, supposedly, and there's all this like crazy shit. But the other thing that he'd like to do is he'd like to go down to the bus stations around Los Angeles. Yeah. And you get these girls that were coming from Ohio, you know, and bringing them back, and he's making dirty 16 millimeter movies. Well, some of those girls were the girls that ended up with Charlie because he was over at Brian Wilson's, you know, trying to get a record deal with the Beach Boys and all that kind of shit. Well, these girls, they latched on to Charlie, and Charlie's still like, oh, my man, you know, I'm a garbage man. And they're like, hey, no, Charlie, we got to go kill this guy. He's a pervert. And they were like, they were victims, you know, and they're like, they're really angry. And he was like, oh, yeah, you know, well, helter skelter. I don't know. I'm just trying to do my thing. Like, I want to be a rock star. And he did. He legitimately wanted to be like signed. He wanted to be a millionaire. He wanted to drive around in Cadillacs, all that stuff. So they kept nagging him. And then supposedly he said, well, go fucking do it then. And then they did it. And then they came back and like, we did it. And then he was like, well, you know, helter skelter, maybe I do have the power. And then they ran off and then they got caught, and you know the rest of the story. But the way that was told to me is it wasn't a random attack. They weren't getting mixed up with Terry Melcher's house.
Right.
They knew who they were. The only problem was that Roman Polanski wasn't home.
Yeah.
And
he was out shooting a movie.
In Italy or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Well, then what's his name?
Bugliosi. Yeah.
Bugliosi, and then he tells the story of them being, you know, crazy hippies and all that stuff. And it's like, yeah, to a certain extent, obviously, you know, they had a problem with authority and all that kind of stuff. But this whole idea that, you know, that Charlie was a mass killer, I mean, that's just, it's so like, it's just not even the reality of the thing. And this tends to happen where we start talking about these psyops and all that stuff. And yeah, I think that maybe he was pushed in a way, but I think there's also some legitimacy to these girls being involved, and they were like the X factor that the handlers didn't necessarily account for. Like, I don't know if they really wanted it to go down like that. I think they wanted Charlie to be free for as long as possible. But when they found those bodies and the death to pigs and all pigs must die and all that shit, they couldn't cover it up. That was just too big. That wasn't like going in the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic with a parole officer in 1966.
Oh, yeah.
67. You know, that was just, they couldn't cover that one up. So like, hey, Charlie, but that's why they never killed him. And that's why they never let him go, because he was a weapon and they wanted to study him. And I think there's more. I think there's more of him. Like, we haven't seen the last of that.
Exactly. He was a Manchurian candidate.
Yeah.
And I opined that Carlos Castaneda, who was also a famous writer,
I know about him.
I worked in his realm and I knew him, and I opined that he was another psyop. He was another person that was used, like basically simultaneously these two men were created and just basically used to see what they could do, and just in terms of shifting the culture. Carlos used academia and books, and Charlie used the hippie movement, basically.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that Don Juan was even a real guy?
I think he was a conglomeration of several different people that he'd met in his time in Mexico. Absolutely. But I don't think it was one specific person, no.
Right, I can go along with that. Now, what do you think about the witches that Carlos had under his spell?
Oh, I'll just let you guys talk now.
I'm sorry.
No, not at all. This is just her specialty. She was in Carlos's cult for years.
I was actually in that cult, and I knew these women. I knew these women personally.
Okay, well, my dad used to read those books a lot, so I think I'd like to hear about this, but maybe we should do a different episode, because I know
we should definitely, you and I and Chris, if he's interested, we should definitely have a fireside chat about this.
And that seems as good a place as any to end the first free hour. In order to access the second hour and the commentary by Hunter and I, just go to patreon.com/themeltpodcast, and for as little as $3 a month, you can get access to full episodes, early episodes, and exclusive episodes, along with monthly Melt meetups that are pretty mind-blowing, actually, and very therapeutic for the people who attend, and we record those and release those as Patreon-only episodes. In the second hour, we talk about the Inheritors, the Controllers, Orphan Trains, World Expos, Disneyland, and tunnels found under golf courses, along with much, much more. Thank you so very much for listening. It is very much appreciated. And until next time, take care, people. If you've liked what you've heard and would like to contribute to The Melt, there are a few ways that you can do that. The most tangible would be financially. Just click the Patreon link in the episode notes, and there you will find ways that you can contribute for as little as $3 a month. This will give you access to bonus episodes, early access to regular episodes, and you can also participate in monthly Zoom meetups. Contributing financially will also help make The Melt better, pay the bills, and help to make this podcast a full-time endeavor that I can fully devote my time to and provide you with more content. Another way of contributing would be to go to wherever it is that you subscribe to The Melt and give it a favorable review or rating, and this will help it to reach more people. You can also spread the word to friends and family via social media, email, or word of mouth. And lastly, if none of those options are readily available or appealing to you, simply send your positive thoughts and intentions. In an interconnected and quantumly entangled multiverse, these also go a long way. Thank you.